How's it going? So I reviewed 44 different Webtoon Canvas creators' Patreon accounts, so you don't have to. Cheers, you're welcome. And now I can say with some confidence how different Webtoon creators are using Patreon, what different content they're providing, and hopefully give you some helpful tips on how to make yours successful. So I am making this video because I got a DM a couple days ago from one person asking me for tips on how to set up a Patreon page. So this is intended for one person. Cheers to you. Before I dive into Patreon account comparisons and how everybody's using it differently and the variations, let's get the facts straight. Number one, Patreon is awesome. It provides a really wonderful and encouraging environment for fans to connect with creators and get exclusive content. It's especially wonderful for Webtoon Canvas creators because we're not able to provide certain features that Webtoon Originals creators can create. So we can't have a fast pass, but we can do that on Patreon. And fact number two, let's face it, not all your readers are going to support you on Patreon, and I've actually calculated out the percentage that these Webtoon creators have of their readers who are now their patrons, and the percentage is probably a lot smaller than you expected it to be. So who the heck am I and why am I talking about this? I have a Webtoon. I've been making it for about 3 years now, and I've had a Patreon for probably about the same time. I don't exactly remember when I started it. And at this point in my journey, I make around $420 a month. So it's that sweet spot. It's not enough for me to pay my, quit my job and use it to pay my rent, but it is enough that I have to include it on my tax forms. But when I launched my Patreon, I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't know anybody else using it. So I want to give you a realistic expectation for what your Patreon account can look like. And to get you an idea of how many readers are going to follow you there, I've made a helpful chart. So your readers can be divided up in a lot of different ways. But first of all, we're going to divide them into those who want to support you and those who have the ability to support you. So once your readers discover that you have a Patreon page, you can divide them into two categories. Those who want to support you financially and those who don't. Those who want to take that step and support you financially are either going to be content independent or content dependent. A content independent person is going to stay no matter what you're creating. They just really want to support your creative endeavors. And a content dependent individual is going to come and go depending on the content you're producing and if they feel like it's worth their buck. Now, out of the readers who have decided they want to support you, now we have to consider those who are able to support you, right? So we have want versus ability. And that ability is going to come down to digital payment. How many of them have access to credit cards and income, or how many don't have an income, maybe don't have a way to pay money digitally, like they don't have a credit card or PayPal, or are they just too young to have access to these things? If you have a younger audience, chances are they're not going to have the ability to join your Patreon and pay something digitally. The second one is, can they afford to? Is if this adult does have a credit card and an income, do they have enough that they can spare $5 a month? Some people are on a really tight budget and they just can't afford to, and then some can. So the individuals who join your Patreon, it comes down to, do they know your Patreon exists? Do they want to? And do they have the ability to help you? Now I'm guessing you want the statistics. Hi. Future Isabel here. I realize that some of you might be questioning how I selected the Patreon pages that I did this analysis on. So to choose them, I just went to the Webtoon homepage and I went to Canvas, and then I went through the categories and chose the top 4 stories of some of the most popular categories, and then went to the Patreon pages if they had them available. So every one of these 44 that was analyzed is considered a top Webtoon in Webtoon Canvas. When you go to the genres, they are in the top of their genre. So out of the 44 Webtoon Canvas Patreon pages I visited, on average, less than 1% of your readers followed you to your Patreon page. The average was actually 0.29%, and the highest I found was around 2%. So that can seem really, really small, but those are the realistic numbers you can anticipate. And many of these creators, with only 1% of their readers following them to their Patreon page, are making a significant living and are very comfortable. And you know that because they're not sharing their incomes publicly. So what actually makes a Patreon page successful? That comes down to your audience, their wants, their abilities, and the content that you are providing. Most of the Patreon accounts I visited had over 4 tiers. They ranged from $1 a month to $80 a month. The most common type of content being provided were those early access to chapters / fast pass access to chapters. Some creators only had 1 chapter for early release, where some had upwards of 3 chapters available to read in advance. Sketches and whips were the second most common, with tied for 3rd place a link to a Discord server and not safe for work content. The income ranged quite drastically. While some popular Canvas creators were making very little income on Patreon, others, usually once they started making over $3,000 a month, all set their income to private. So I can no longer see or even try to calculate how much they were making. Except one person who left their income as public, who had approximately 3,000 patrons and made around $35,000 a month. $35,000 a month. I've blurred them. Find them if you want to. So which content appears to be the most successful / most desirable? Well, buckle your seatbelts, because here's the raw truth. Not safe for work appears to be the most successful category for Patreon Webtoon Canvas creators. So many of these accounts had upper tiers available that provided not safe for work content. We all saw this coming, didn't we? I mean, but now we can see it with our own eyes. Here are the facts. I can't look away. This is the truth. Not safe for work content is tied in 3rd place for the most common exclusive content provided by these 44 accounts. And while that's lovely, like, damn, get your coin, sis. That's great. Good for you. It's not possible for everybody. Some people aren't going to be comfortable producing that, or just don't really want to make it. And secondly, some of us, the majority of our audience is teenagers. They are underage. You gotta know your audience, know what they want, and if you're able to do it, like, props to you. So, after all this, how do we use this information? How am I gonna use this information? Because this is definitely making me rethink, like, what I'm doing on Patreon. I already know that I had set myself up for a disadvantage when I made it originally. When I started my comic, I intended it to appeal to a younger audience. So I anticipated that, individuals 12 to 20 would be the majority of my audience. Because I was doing something very tropey, very campy. And while many of my readers are aging into adulthood now, not all of them had access to credit cards. Not all of them had incomes, so they weren't able to join my Patreon account. And I wasn't producing unsafe for content because I don't really know. Compare that to a comic designed for an adult audience, right? Those who are likely to have credit cards and income to spare, and those who might be willing to pay for that smutty bonus scene. My current comic is coming to an end very, very soon. I only have like 3 to 5 chapters left. And I'm already thinking of my next story. I've been brainstorming it. And I know I want it to appeal to a more adult audience. And on one hand, that's because I'm ready to write something more mature. I'm ready to write something more serious. I want to challenge my writing skills. And on the other hand, I would like to make a little more money. And so appealing to an adult audience would make it easier for them to find my Patreon and be able to join it. But I loved a couple of the things I found. I really love, so one of my colleagues, I guess you could call her, she has a monthly character diary. So she's actually writing what her character's internal struggles are, and she posts that on her Patreon, and I think that's probably helped her a lot. I think that's a great idea. I also love the idea of the Discord. A lot of people are providing that. that probably only works when you have a large enough fan base. I don't know if I have a large enough one. I love the live stream sessions. Some people had live stream links, which is great for Q&As or for sketch time. There were a couple other written things, more like, you know, non-illustrated novel things I liked. Somebody had an author diary. I thought that was great. Just showing what their progress was, how they were developing characters. And I mean, you gotta consider the not safe for work content. I mean, damn, those numbers don't lie. And I know some of those other pages are making just as much as $35,000 a month. They're just not admitting it. That's why everything is set to public. And dang, if you're making $35,000 a month, you wouldn't want to go to Webtoon Originals. You'd be happy to stay on Canvas and really, really grateful to your audience. But dang, what would you be doing if you could make $35,000 a month? As always, let me know if you have any questions down at the bottom, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.